Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 1% Better Recruitment Podcast with your host, Charles Kiriakou. Today, I'm joined by Alex Elliott. A lot of you will probably know who this man is, but for the people who may or may not know who you are, Alex, it'd be great for you to give us a bit of an intro to what you've done and what you're currently doing at the moment.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for having me on. Delighted to be invited, Charles. I really like your podcast. So, no, thank you. It's a real honor. So I'm Alex Elliott. My background's recruitment. I've been in the industry for over 20 years. It always makes me pause and think how long I've actually been in the industry. So 19 years, I think, this year. No, that's not true. 22 years. So I'm very much a veteran. So I previously built and scaled a recruitment company with a co-founder and a really exceptional team, and we exited that. We started that business in 2006 and exited it in 2016 via a PE sale. Ever since then, I've been involved in the industry. I've invested in other recruitment companies. I've invested in RecTech, and I do some advisory work as well. So that's a sort of a brief overview of my last 22 years.
Love it. Awesome. And thank you very much for the kind words. It's an honor to have you on. So for people tuning in, what to expect from this episode. So as Alex rightly said before we clicked record, we've got 3 or 4 topics, but you know, we could just spend a whole episode on just one of the topics, to be honest. But to give you a bit of a clue as to what we're going to talk about, what actually is performance psychology, what is leadership psychology, what is a sustainable and scalable BD process, and how do we fire properly and how do we fire quickly, which is terms that we hear a lot in this industry. Let's just start off with performance psychology, Alex, because you know you've listened to this podcast before. You know I'm very passionate about understanding how different people do this job, what the top billers do, the top business owners do, etc. If you could give us a bit of an understanding of what you mean by performance psychology, and we can kind of dive into that first topic, I suppose.
Well, I guess like breaking it down into its most simplest form, I think you've got skill and will. And I think there's understandably so, there's a big emphasis on the skill piece. And clearly that's going to drive a lot of outcomes. But for me, from my experience, the real thing that will drive those outlier performance levels is the will piece. Mm-hmm. So again, it's interesting. We were just talking a lot then about training and what have you. And recruitment companies typically have really thorough onboarding and performance management, often have thorough performance management practices around the skill bits.
Yeah.
But interestingly, when you look at onboarding programs, not many companies focus on the will bit. So I think that's why performance psychology is such an interesting topic, because effectively, although in my opinion, it's even more important than the skill bit, typically it's actually the bit that gets focused on less. So I don't know if that doesn't actually answer your question.
I think it does.
Psychology, I guess, is maximizing results, isn't it?
Yeah.
Outside of skill.
Well, I think what you've done is you've given me an avenue to go under, because if I look back at when I first got in the industry, and we spoke about this very briefly when we began, I never had any formal training. My first job as an apprentice, we did sales stuff like coursework, but it was like, what's cross-selling, what's upselling. It wasn't very recruitment specific. And the director would sit us in a broom closet, I'm not even joking, and she'd have like some books from like the REC or APSCO, and it was like, what is a PSL? What is a managed vendor? And it was like, it wasn't really like what's a cold call opener or anything like that. And then my second job, we listened to, I think it was like Mike Walmsley DVDs, which is going back now. We didn't really have any L&D people coming in the office, nothing. But then when I moved to Projectus, and that was my first job in perm recruitment, we didn't necessarily have formal training, but they made an effort to make the senior guys and people that have sold the first retainer or got a client exclusive do a little workshop. We had an L&D consultant come once a month to sit by your side to essentially just give you a bit of a G up and give you some confidence. It was nothing really overly specific. But one thing they did do that was quite interesting, and I had no idea what this was at the time, is they did the DISC profiles, they did McQuaig's and the 13 personalities, whatever it was called. And I remember going through this with the business owner and his wife, like, you're a high DI. I was like, don't have a bloody clue what that means, but okay, apparently I'm someone that can influence people, sure. And they kind of understood a little bit more about the psychology of what I'm going to be good at. And then they started finessing the skills on the job. So I suppose from your perspective, and maybe a question I could ask you is, you know, if a business owner is listening to this and perhaps they've got some people that are good at the job, but they're 1 month good, blank, 1 month good, there's like a lack of motivation, or as you said, a lack of will. How do you, this is kind of 2-part question. How do you firstly like identify what the will gap is, if that even makes sense. Let's start with that, because I'm going to overcomplicate it. How do you identify like the will aspect of someone coming into the business, would you say?
So it's a big question. And I always say the easiest, how do you have a super motivated sales floor? You hire people who are incredibly intrinsically motivated. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, I think first and foremost, it's understanding what motivation is and how much you can actually drive somebody's motivation. For me, what I got good at, I think, was hiring people who were already intrinsically motivated, some of them extremely so, and then giving them the environment where they were surrounded by other peers who were also extremely intrinsically motivated, and then ensuring that I did things which topped that up and maintained a level of motivation, rather than me hiring someone and then thinking this person isn't overly motivated, what do I need to do about that? That would be a huge red flag for me. So I guess I'm not directly answering your question with regards to identifying gaps. The gaps piece is understanding somebody's drivers, what they want to achieve in their life on a personal level, from a career perspective, from a financial perspective, and being able to really, really relate to that individual and understand what gets them out of bed every day. And then being able to tap into those things and give them and help them develop a clear plan with regards to how they can achieve those things. I'm a big nature versus nurture guy. And I think sometimes we focus too much on nurture and not enough on nature. Because some people, they can have the best will in the world that they want to do certain things in their career or their life, but they simply don't have the discipline or the accountability to be able to drive through in those periods where they aren't necessarily motivated. And we're all like that. I have days where I'm like, why am I bothering? You know, we all have up and down days. I think it's the discipline that gets you through. So not necessarily answering your question there, Charles, but yeah, I'd focus on making sure you're hiring the right people in the first place. And if somebody genuinely has consistent issues around motivation and consistency with regards to what they're doing, you know, I'd be quite concerned about that, whether that's the right person, rather than actually trying to maybe fix it.
100%. And I think later on in this conversation, we'll dive into more about what that hiring process looks like. Because I think historically and ironically, recruitment agencies are typically very bad at hiring people, which is weird because our jobs are to hire the ideal fit for people. So yeah, it's weird. Going back to what you said about intrinsic motivations, right? So I've always been fascinated by coaching, by human psychology, neurolinguistic programming, all that type of stuff. So when I became a sales manager, the first thing that I said I would do for my team was, we had these kind of like these whiteboard things that you could stick up on the wall, these little thin bits of like plastic, whatever. And I would write up my name and the two guys in my team's name. And we would set together in a boardroom once a month what our business goals are, what our health and fitness goals are, our mindset goals, our relationship goals, and our finance goals. And largely, obviously, business and finance would link, relationship, health, etc. But my point is every single month, if they just sat there and set a goal for mindset that was, I'm going to read a book, I'm not just going to sit there and go, great, fantastic. What book are you going to read? It's okay. Why do you want to do that? Well, I'm going to read The Psychology of Money. Why? Because I want to save more money. I've historically been bad at money. Okay. Why have you been? And it's really digging into each and every point. So we'd spend a whole hour between the three of us, and they would coach me the entire time as well, as why do we want to hit target? Yeah, sure, to keep our jobs, but what does that enable us to do, etc. So what that allowed me to do as a sales manager is that I knew exactly what buttons to press. So if I saw a colleague that was sat there scrolling TikTok, or back then it was Instagram and Facebook, I knew that I could just look up at that and didn't have to say anything and just go, and just point, and they'll go, fair. And that's ideal for a manager, because you don't want to be hammering them and say, hit your KPIs and stuff. They knew what their motivators were. They knew why they were there. They knew what they wanted to achieve. They knew what their life wanted to look like. And they knew that in recruitment, if you want to have a nice car, if you want to move out in your 20s, if you want to have an amazing wedding, etc., you can do that. It's almost insulting how much money you can earn at a young age in this industry. So my question to you, if you can answer it, that is with the intrinsic motivators, when you have sat down with people in the past and gone through these motivators and stuff, and if someone's listening to this and said, okay, sure, what actually is an intrinsic motivator? I suppose my question to you would be, perhaps, what stories have you had where you've worked with someone to really get down to their actual real intrinsic motivator? And what have you done once you've kind of got that, basically?
So I guess with intrinsic motivators, for me, it's about understanding the theme and the underlying, the real root cause of why somebody does something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, why do people want to earn money? If people join recruitment companies, typically it's because they're financially motivated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first thing, because typically you join a recruitment company when you're reasonably young, you're skint, you've got some financial aspirations. But more importantly than that, rather than purely focusing in on this person wants to, and you'll get a lot of stock responses, I want to buy a car, I want to get a house, blah, blah, blah. I think you need to get underneath that. And I think you need to understand what's important to an individual from a theme perspective. So if you think about what money represents, it might represent status, it might represent freedom, it might represent power, it might represent autonomy. There's maybe that's the same thing as freedom, but I think the key is to understand different behavioral types and understand really what the underlying thing that gets them out of bed every day is. So I think that's really, really important. Specific examples, I've probably got loads. So what I got better at over time was figuring out who those really hyper motivated individuals were, and then giving them a career plan which was geared around them achieving their personal goals while the business also achieved its goals. So if you could align those two things together, it was like this magical sauce that you could put together. And then clearly you can really tap into that with regards to someone's career pathway and constantly being able to challenge them to develop and learn the necessary skills to continue progressing in their career. So I think we were good at that from a career development perspective with our hyper-driven people. And I guess the second bit around that I'd highlight is that not everyone's going to be like that. And although we're talking about intrinsic motivation, it sounds like you had a really good team there with regards to the individuals and how you were trying to encourage them. Some people, and I call them B players, and that offends some people, but the reality is the difference between a lot of A players and B players is that A players just want it more. They're just more career motivated. They're just more focused on their career than maybe there are other aspects of their life. As time went on, I got better at realizing that everyone wasn't like me. Not everyone wanted to work 12, 14-hour days. Not everyone had that same level of aspiration outside of their personal life that I did. So I think one of the mistakes I made earlier on was treating everyone like I was, and that had really negative impacts. What I got better at over time was understanding what someone's true drivers were, because some people just don't care that much about, some people don't want a holiday home. Some people don't want, to fly first class. Some people don't want to be the managing director of a recruitment company, and that's absolutely okay. And I lost some good people because I think I treated them like myself too early on. And I think I got better at really understanding beneath all the BS what really does actually matter to this person. And this person, actually, they do want to leave reasonably on time. They do want to have a more balanced personal life. And you know what? We can facilitate that as a business because they're still really good performers. And I'm not going to pressurize them to be like me and try and set my targets or impose my targets and my goals and ambitions onto them. So again, I'm not sure I'm necessarily answering your question directly.
You are.
But I guess that was the way that I thought about those things and what I got better at over time. And I think you just got to get someone's head. And I mean that in a nice way. I used to joke that part of your job as a sales leader is to be a psychiatrist, because you have to figure out why someone ticks. And once you figure out why someone ticks and also have the self-awareness and emotional management, not to let your ego go and not try and force someone to be something they're not. I think that's your starting point to be able to really genuinely understand what's important to that person and then manage them appropriately. Because someone who wants to take over the business one day, you can push and challenge, and you can get to think bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can demand more and more of, because they want that. If you have that same approach with people who don't have those same aspirations, and I've done it, it goes badly.
100%. No, you've answered that brilliantly, to be fair. And remind me, just in case I lose my track here, I want to uncover what your mental transition was from essentially managing people like how you wanted to be managed type thing, because I feel like that's a very common theme for people that have either gone through what you've gone through in terms of growing, scaling, exiting, etc., or even someone that has just run a recruitment business for 5 to 10 years, where And I've been like that, where I've just I've interviewed people for my team and said, I really like that person. They wouldn't have been a fit for the business or for my team. They just liked the same sport as me, or they were very similar to me. They probably wouldn't have been right. And managing people initially, like you said, my first thing, I come from a nursing contract background, fucking long hours, super aggressive, borderline cowboy environment, get on the phones. Just, you can't manage people like that all the time. So I'd be interested to know what your mental switch was. Like, what, if anything, happened for you to then go, fuck, all right, I can't be treating people like I want to be treated, or I can't be doing that. What was, if there was, what would be the sort of mental switch that happened for yourself?
Yeah, just issue retention, isn't it? If you push people in a direction they don't want to go, they will go somewhere else. And I lost some good people because I was pushing them too hard for more. And some people want that. You know, how much is enough? And it's like, well, there isn't for some people.
Yeah.
Other people, they're quite comfortable earning X. They're quite comfortable working a long day, but at the same time, they don't want to be silly about it. So I just lost some good people. And the reality is, as I always say, any sales floor is like a bell curve. If you look at it from a productivity perspective, every sales floor is a bell curve, and you've got probably, I don't know, 15 to 20% on the right of the bell curve who are your outliers from a performance perspective or from a growth perspective, because I don't think it's not just about billing. A players, for me, there's two types of A player. You've got individuals who consistently exceed target, or you've got individuals who consistently hit or exceed target and have the talent and ability and drive to go to the next stage in their career. You can continue, you can kind of build around. But you've got that 15, 20% on the right who are probably your superstars. You've got 15 to 20% typically who are underperforming on the left of the bell curve. And obviously you need to do something about that. And then the middle core, who are your consistent performers, who will perform to a similar standard where they're consistently hitting target within reason. They're your B players, is how I describe it. So I think understanding that is a good starting point to figure out my job is to move that bell curve to the right. Yeah. And that means upping standards, but you can't move that bell curve to the right if your retention isn't good enough for B players. Yeah. So you do have to make everybody in the business feel important and valued, because they are. And everything that you're doing from a leadership perspective, if you really break it down into a science, is moving your bell curve to the right, both in volume and average productivity. So figure that stuff out and have an approach which is aligned to achieving that as an objective.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think, you know, I want to kind of dive into the leadership psychology shortly as well. But going back a second, when you said about, like, as a leader, as a sales manager, etc., part of your job is that psychiatrist type mentality, right? We've talked a lot about trying to uncover people's motivations and their intrinsic motivations, getting deeper and stuff like that. I've given an example, and I've spoken about this a few times on the podcast, of going into the goal setting as a team and doing the one-to-one stuff. It does baffle me, to be honest, how many recruitment business owners and managers that if I were to sit down with them like we are right now and say, Joe blogs, why does he come to work? Most of them would just say they're money motivated, they want to hit target. And I literally had a coaching session with someone today that said, yeah, money's important to me, but it's not the most important. Is that really stupid? Should I be telling you that? Like, the first person I ever managed didn't care how much money he had. He didn't have any savings, didn't have motivations to buy a car, a house, which, by the way, if you're first person when you get promoted to manager, be honest, it's not ideal.
Interesting case study.
Yeah, very interesting case study. And also the way it was presented to me was, the guy's blanked for a few months and don't know if we're going to get rid of him. We really like the guy, but you want to be a coach down the line, don't you? So this is a great little experiment for you. If you can get this guy turning around, imagine how good that would be. Oh, fuck's sake. All right, fine. And we got him to turn around.
Let's set you up to fail, Charles.
Yeah. I mean,
it's your first step into leadership. Basically, you're going to balls it up and they'll be gone because we either sack them or they're, you know, so good luck with that.
I'm such an optimist though. And I was so naive. I just looked at that like, this is a really good opportunity. Like,
A player. It's like, I face a challenge. This is a challenge. Yeah. Therefore I must overcome it. Yeah.
Exactly. And the thing is I took him to President's Club on the first year I managed the guy. Numbers wise, I think out of the X amount of placements he made, like 90% were my clients. And we realized that his key strength was delivery. And I mention him in every single time I do training that's about where we talk about closing. I've never met anyone to this day that was that good at pre-closing. He had the record in 1 year, I think it was like 2018, 2019, for placing the most amount of candidates on a lesser salary than what they were on, because he understood their needs so much. So that's why he bought into the coach and stuff, because he's like, I'm not motivated at all by money. I spend my fucking paycheck by day one. I don't really care. But then when we actually got down to it, I can't remember who done a workshop in our business about this. And they were talking about motivators and said one of the key motivators of people is what they would call legacy. And as soon as that popped up on the board, he looks at that and I could see his face and he was like, that's what really motivates me. And I'm like, okay, it's quite an interesting like motivator for a recruiter. Like, what does that actually mean? And because he'd done music in outside of work and him and his band would post things on Spotify, he was a bright blue personality, proper perfectionist. He wanted to have something that someone can look at and go, you created that. That is amazing. Or if the service he provided for someone and the deal came in at only 5K, which in our market was slightly, a little bit lower than what it should be. But if a 5K deal came in and the candidate said, Alex, you were the best recruiter I've ever worked with. The client said, you're amazing. That for him made his entire year. That's what really, really motivated him. So you've been through this many times, and I think we've kind of touched on this. But if you were to sit down with, we'll do two examples. If we're to sit down with somebody that's within the business, that maybe we're going through this again, someone that's a senior consultant, like a B player, like you say, they're kind of hitting target, but we know they could do a little bit better. How do we really dig in? Like, what are some questions? What are some processes to really dig into their motivations intrinsically, that is? And then again, similar to somebody that is coming into the business, or perhaps we can maybe talk about that when we talk about hiring. But if we just stick with like the senior consultants, recons that are in the business, what are some things that we can do to really truly understand their like intrinsic motivators?
Yeah, so I think starting off very broadly with what's important to you, why you're here, I think the 5 whys is a great thing to do.
Yeah.
Why is that important? Why is that important? Why that answer? You know, so I think it's a little bit like good interviewing technique. I think poor interviewers, they have a template and they ask the first question on that template and they fill out the answer and then they move on to the next question. And the way that I always described it was you've got to walk down the sales corridor, and every time a question's asked, you've got to close all of the doors that come with the answer.
I like that.
And every answer is going to open more doors. And you've just got to keep going down that sales corridor until you hit a brick wall at the end, because there's literally no more questions to ask because you genuinely understand the answer. Whereas I think it's very easy to skip over things. So look, without giving you specific example questions, I think as a framework, starting broadly, and using the 5 whys as an example to then be able to box that off until you get to the point where you feel like you really get that person. And it's truthful as well, because that's the other problem. You sit down with someone, a senior consultant, and you say to them what's important to you. It's a little bit like cold calling. The first response is usually a smokescreen. So I think you also have to be really good at de-weaponizing that situation in their eyes, making them feel comfortable, making them understand the objective of what you're trying to do, and that effectively they genuinely believe that you're there to help them, rather than just stick a number against their name with regards to what their target should be. But you're genuinely interested in them and that you care, and that if you can do that effectively, I think they're a lot more likely, and challenge them. Because as I say, the first smoke screen is, oh, you want to buy a house, like boring.
Yeah.
Everyone says that. Like, do you really? You know, so I think you can playfully challenge people as well to get them to open up to you a little bit more. Try and disarm them. Make them really comfortable so they feel talking about that stuff, and then just ask loads of follow-up questions until you can really get into that person's head.
Yeah, the coaching, the management psychology aspect of things, and just it all comes back to, and the reason why this pops into my head now is because I've recently just done a candidate qualification, job qualification training, and I've got them to make their own checklist. So with every single slide we go through, like the MIT's most important things, the current process, they write their own questions, and then below that it's asking the 5 whys, or the what else, who else, etc. And it's exactly the same as that. It's just the basic aspect of the recruitment job when you're sat down with someone, of just digging into everything, asking things in a linear line. Once you got to that brick wall, moving on. I've something popped into my head when you were saying about new car, new house. Like, everyone says that. Of course, when I was 23 and I moved into working into the city, that was the first thing I did when I sat down with my manager and my managing director. And I'll never forget Tim, who I've met a reference on this podcast a lot because he was an absolute legend. He sat down and was just like, why do you want to get a new car? And I was like, well, because my car's shit. And he went, what's so shit about it? I was like, well, I'll be honest, it's really embarrassing, but I went on a date the other day and the power steering went. He was like, right, okay. And I was like, and I had to basically just not show any emotion to this girl because I would have looked like an absolute idiot, but I was fucking having a panic attack on the M25 and I had to call my uncle and pretend to go to the toilet to say, I think my car's fucked. And then 2 weeks later, the head gasket blew, the radiator melted. So now I don't have a fucking car and it's going to cost me $1,000. I bought it for $1,000. It's going to cost me $1,000 to fix it. It's embarrassing. I don't want to get another secondhand car. I want to get a brand new one. He was like, okay.
Your motivator, Charles, was sex. That's what you're saying.
No.
Yeah, 100%. You wanted sex, and you probably didn't get any because you look like a plonker. And look, I get it. You're a young man, and that's an important driver. So how can we incentivize Charles with sex? That's like leadership 101.
Maybe when I was 23 years old and I was a bit of a fucking rascal for sure. But the point I'm trying to make is they went so deep into the car thing. I was just solely expecting him to be like, cool, here's how many deals you need to do to get a car. Do you know what I mean? But when it actually got to that, and then there was an emotional connection to my drive to want to buy a car, of not being embarrassed. I hated having to ask family for a lift. I wanted the autonomy, the freedom, all the rest of it. And I wanted to buy a brand new car because I don't know the first thing about cars. And I've had such a bad experience with that one that I just wanted a car that I could have and not have to worry that it's ever going to break and all the rest of it. So then they worked out how much I'd need to put down as a deposit. They found some different things that were 0% APR for 3 years, etc. So I managed to hit all my KPIs for, I think, when was that? That was end of 2016. I hit all my KPIs for the following 12 months, revenue targets, etc., etc. And in October 2017, I went to the Ford garage where I used to live in Potts Bar, and I test drove the car. It was like, this is amazing. It was the latest Ford Fiesta with like a little screen in it, all the rest of it. And I whacked 10 grand down. I think I had like 15 grand in my savings. So I could have bought it outright pretty much. I was like, and this is a 23-year-old brain, which is mental. So if I put 10 grand down, 0% APR, my credit score will go up because I want to buy a house in a few years. It's financed the last 7 grand, I think it was, for 3 years. Paid that off early because, again, I was earning decent commission. And then that's what then moved me on to want to do the house thing because I was living at home with my mum. She's overbearing and she's disabled and all the rest of it. And I was like, all right, my point is, the reason why I bring that up is similar to what I was saying to you earlier, Alex, that unfortunately, and whether it's because they put this facade on, oh, we're so busy, blah, 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 unless you're going to go really fucking deep into that, you're going to have someone, and again, not to blow smoke, but they always used to say I was like a rough diamond. They just needed to just make sure that polish me, all the rest of it, because I was a fucking one of those little wheelback cars and I'd just go off in the wrong direction. If I didn't know how to set goals, I didn't know what motivated me. But with the line of questioning I had from the leadership at that time and the direction from my line manager to be like, you're wasting your time on that, focus on that. That's what made me one of the high performers in the company. And I just think there's so many businesses I've worked at permanently and whilst I'm doing my contracting stuff that you can see that person's got fucking potential. That person's got the will. They've got talent, but they're just being mismanaged, misdirected. They don't even understand why they're there. So when they're having an off day, which we're all human, we're all going to have an off day, but what are the little triggers that you can touch to be like I said earlier about pointing up at the whiteboard and go, is that going to help you buy an engagement ring? Is that going to help you be the best version in the market, etc.? Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, I do. And I think what I like about what you were saying, I like a lot about what you were saying, was that once you can really understand the emotional implications of someone's objectives and you believe them, that they are true, like intrinsic drivers for behavior, I think the interesting bit then is to say, well, what's the plan?
Yes.
Because a lot of people will have an emotional goal, but they don't necessarily. So you've got your two parts of your brain really broadly. You've got the emotional piece and you've got the logical bit. I think people typically, emotion drives us a lot more than probably people realize, right? We all like to think we're really rational and logical, but actually we're not. So I think if you can tap into somebody, if you can help someone really uncover what their emotional drivers are, I think the next bit is then to help them sometimes formulate a plan as to what that looks like. Okay, so how quickly do you want to buy this car? What's the time frame? What sort of car are we talking about? What's that going to cost you? How long is it going to take you to save that money? Talk me through that. So literally, how much, like, have you got any debt at this moment in time? How much debt are you repaying? How much does your rent cost? So actually, bottom line, on a month-on-month basis at this moment in time, this is how much you're saving towards that car. Talk me through the commission structure, how much you need to build. So I think that's the really interesting bit where you tie the emotion and the logic together. And then all of a sudden, there's that really powerful combination of those two things, which again, gives you the ability to pull those right levers. Yeah. Because if you go through that process with someone and using yourself as an example, and then in month 2, Like your activity levels have dropped considerably. All of a sudden, you're leaving on time every night, even though you're behind target. You're not demonstrating the right focus and discipline.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're perfectly within your rights to be able to sit down with that individual and say what's going on. Because
100%.
either your goal doesn't really matter to you, and that was a bit of a waste of time. And look, if that's the case and things have changed, let's talk about that. Otherwise, what's up?
100%.
I think that's super powerful, isn't it? To be able to have those really like deep, meaningful, and it's not this. This almost sounds. This could, if you viewed it negatively, sound quite manipulative. It's not, because I think. Have you read what's that book on communication? Radical Candor. So really good book on effective communication, and like the entire premise of the lady who wrote that book is that you've got to challenge directly. But you've got to care personally. I think that's what
I like that.
Yeah, and it's so true, because I think, again, it's about managing duality. I think if someone knows you really do care, you give a shit, they're a lot more open to being challenged quite directly with regards to what's going on. If they don't believe, if they don't really know in their heart that you care. You know, people don't care what you know until they know how much you care, that old cliche. I think it's true. Yeah. And that's what gives you the ability to have those really quite deep and personally confrontational conversations where you can say to someone, are you being the best version of yourself? Like,
it's a powerful question.
Are you taking the easy way out here? Do these goals really matter to you? Like, then why aren't you following through on the key things which get you to those goals? And again, I think giving them that, what is it? Give someone a golden bridge to escape on. You want to let them know that they can change those goals if they want to. I'm not just going to keep hitting you over the head with those goals if they're no longer important to you. But let's go back to basics here and actually figure out whether this is driving you or not, because it doesn't appear to be, based upon the fact that you don't seem to have the discipline or the accountability to be able to follow through on the things that are going to get you there. Yeah,
that's a really powerful question, what you said. Like, are these goals actually important to you? Are you actually trying to be the best version of yourself? Remember my NLP trainer and coach, Ricky, who's been on this podcast before, used to say, like, is what you're doing now helping or hindering future you? Is what you're thinking helping or hindering future you? So if you're, and I said this to the guy on the coaching session this morning about how I caught myself last night. It was a bit of a weird experience. I sat on the sofa. I've been to and from work, 2-hour drive either way, 8 hours in the training room. I've come home and I've just sat on the sofa and it's like 9 o'clock and I'm not even conscious of what's on the telly, and I'm just aimlessly scrolling on my phone, which I've not done all week because I've been too busy. And in my mind, I was like, I'm working from home tomorrow. I've got a lot on, but I don't have to be up at 6:30. I can have an hour in bed, so I can wait a little bit. And I just stopped myself and I was like, but why are you actually aimlessly scrolling with the telly in the background and you don't even know? Why are you doing that? And then it was a weird experience. And I got up and it was almost like I was on autopilot, where I got up, turned off Instagram, turned the telly off. And I was like, right, went in, brushed my teeth. I was just like thinking, why were you doing that? And basically what it was is that where you're so overwhelmed with so much going on, it's like a defense mechanism, an escapism to not think about how much you have, how scared you potentially are, which is a scary thing to think about, especially as a bloke, because we move that aside and think, oh, we're strong, I'm going to be a dad soon, etc., etc. So no, you're scared with how much you've got on, the things that could go wrong, the anxiety of how much you've got, etc. And that's fine, but you just need to sit in that for a second and just, it will pass, and just appreciate that there are good and there are bad. But it was just catching myself out in that moment. It was quite a weird experience, because about 3-4 weeks ago, when it wasn't quite as busy, I'd just be sat there and I wouldn't have caught myself out, and I would have sat there for 2 hours and gone, fuck, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. What the hell am I doing? I just thought that was quite a wild experience, really.
It's really, credit to you that you've got the self-awareness and the ability to reflect on your emotions. I think, performance psychology, we were talking about earlier. What's performance psychology? A lot of it's just emotional management.
Yeah.
And some people are good at that naturally, and other people, you can give frameworks to people that are really valuable to them, the sort of stuff that you're describing. But being able to sit in your own discomfort and understand that it is a passing thing, and that there are things going on that are making you feel that way, but that it won't be for the long term, because we've all got this natural ability. We're all like evolutionary psychology. on the 150,000 years ago on the savannas of Africa or whatever it might be. We have these feelings because they were designed to, not designed, we evolved feelings as a defense mechanism to prevent ourselves from being eaten. So when you felt overwhelmed or there was stuff going on, typically it was to prevent you from being eaten or murdered or killed or starving or whatever it might be. So there was a real have this feeling, react to it because it's going to help me survive. Nowadays, in the world that we live in, the feelings that are triggered are completely unrelated to survival. And I think the key is to be able to be aware of that. And as you say, sit in your discomfort a little bit and rationalize it, because it always makes me feel better. I do a lot of stuff. I can feel overwhelmed because I've got so many different things going on. I haven't always got the mental bandwidth to keep up with some of it. So I think you just need to slow down and just take a couple of minutes and just like let the emotion pass, and then you can go again.
Yeah, I can't remember who it was that I had on my podcast recently. I think it was a guy called Jack Salmon, who's like a performance coach for like business owners and stuff. And he's on the extreme of the 4:30 in the morning, does the ultra marathons, kind of like a David Goggins from Essex type character.
Wow.
He's a legend. I'm looking forward to releasing the episode. I mean, by the time this episode comes out, that would already be out. But he was talking about how he gets up at that time, but he's always in bed and does his bedtime routine at 8:30. And I questioned into it and said, that's one thing throughout my entire life that, well, not my entire life, but a lot of, especially my adolescence, my older years, is that if I were to just have no alarms and if I could just work and do whatever around specific times, I think my natural body clock would be waking up at 8, 9 in the morning, going to bed at about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. That's just what it naturally is for me. So doing a 9 to 5 back in the day was a bit of a nightmare. And he pulled me up on that. And he was just that, and he said, well, as a coach, and it's interesting because we were saying this earlier, you don't sometimes realize what you've said. And if someone said that to me in a coaching session, I'd pull them up and say, you've just created your own story there. You can shift that story. And he was explaining to me that he used to be a party animal, used to be addicted to drugs, addicted to sex, all the rest of it. And he's reshaped his belief systems, his behaviors, and created different habits that serve him. And we had a bit of a discussion around my bedtime routine. I was like, I don't have one. I did, but when I moved out, like my wife goes to bed way earlier than me. She wakes up way earlier than me, etc. But since I've started working and I've had to be up at like 6:15, 6:20 in the morning, I've forced myself to have like some sort of routine. And what I've noticed, which has been really fascinating, is the ability to catch myself out now when I'm in a belief system or thought that is not serving me. Because every single day that I go to bed now, I use a foam roller for about 2-3 minutes and then just sit in bed and do box breathing until my mind calms down a little bit, and then just try and stay as still as I can until I need to roll over and go on my side. And that can be 2 minutes and I'm exhausted and I fall asleep. That could be 20 minutes. But prior to the last 2 weeks, I'm not even joking. It sounds horrible, but I would be sitting there in bed, rolling around for at least an hour and a half every single night because I couldn't sleep. Like my mind was all over the place. I'd try and do breath work, but it was breath work just to deal with that, not specifically like what I just explained, if that makes sense. And it's wild. In the last like 2 weeks, my Fitbit sleep scores have been 85 to 90 every single day, simply because it's this reframing of this thing. And I guess this kind of comes back to, we're talking about performance psychology. If you're in a training room, and as we spoke before we start recording, and you're trying to engage 19 to 25-year-olds with recruitment training, which on paper, I show it to my wife. She goes, this is the most boring fucking stuff in the world. I fucking love it. And my trainees love it because I'm so fucking passionate about it. But you have to be 10-10 if you're doing a training academy or even just coaching. I never want to go into an office and be like, oh, okay, cool. Like, yeah, we'll just, no, I need to be fucking locked in. So it's been this like wild shift in the last 3 weeks of like, right, actually, fitness, well and good, diet, all well and good, mindfulness, well and good. If you're not figuring out the sleep in line with your performance and you don't have some sort of routine, you're fucked. And that was a long, by the way, that was an incredibly long tangent, but does that make sense?
100%. You can change your sleep patterns, and we all have limiting beliefs, and we all get stuck with internal narratives, which often aren't true.
Yeah, 100%. We have spent the last 40 minutes, by the way, talking about basically one topic. Like I said at the start, I feel like we could just do a whole podcast on each of these topics. I'm going to throw this to you, Alex, because I think we've touched a little bit on leadership psychology, but I don't think we've really properly touched on it like we have with performance psychology. I'm really keen to understand a lot about building a sustainable and scalable BD process for someone from your perspective, but equally very keen to go and dive into more of the leadership psychology. If I throw that to you, what's something that you would prefer, or yeah, what would you like to talk about next out of those two things?
We might as well stick with the psychology bit, I guess.
Yeah,
I'm not sure we'd have enough time to adequately go into a new topic, so maybe stick if that's that probably makes more sense.
I'd love to. Why don't you try and explain to me then, because again, when you've done your intro and you've grown and scaled your business and you work with a lot of different recruitment business, RecTech businesses and stuff, the leadership psychology aspect of stuff is really fascinating, and I think we've touched on a few things around motivating your staff and understanding the intrinsic motivators, but what is the leadership psychology? Well, how is that different to the performance psychology from your perspective?
I think they are in really, really closely linked, because they're a lot of the same things, aren't they? Again, leadership psychology for me, I think leadership is just like recruiting is difficult, because it's not easy, but it's not that difficult to train someone about a management rhythm.
Yeah.
It's not that difficult to train somebody how to run a meeting and what the ideal agenda should be and what objectives you're looking to get from that stuff. So I think, again, it's interesting because the real difference maker for me is the will piece as much as the skill. I think leadership psychology, one of the things I always come back to is standards. What differentiates a recruiter from a leader sometimes, or the person who steps up into leadership a role? I think it's about setting and maintaining standards, and then being relentlessly, ruthlessly focused on improving those standards. Because it's that old cliche of every time you see something below standard and don't do anything about it, you've set a new standard. And then alongside that, I think it's about, and I hate this word because it's so overused now and used in the wrong way as well, but being values driven in an authentically. Yeah. And I hate that whole authentic thing because I think it's just massively overused now. But I think that's something that goes wrong a lot of the time in leadership, where the business will pertain to have certain values, but the truth is that the leadership team aren't demonstrating those values consistently and reliably. So I don't know if they're two interesting sort of topic points, but for me, standards and also values-driven leadership, which is true and real. And if you want a high-performance culture, I think those two things as a starting point are absolutely, core fundamentals.
Yeah, I'm really interested to dive into your perspectives on those, because I've done an episode with a lady called Gemma Downing, who I met at the Recruitment Agency Expo in Birmingham last year. And we did a little bit of content at the Expo, and she wanted to come on the show. And the whole thing we wanted to talk about was how she's got her very small business in Milton Keynes to go from 200K to 2 mil revenue, and how she's gone from just her and her husband to, I think, like 12 plus heads, right? And the number one thing she spoke about was standards. And a lot of recruitment businesses that I've worked at and work with, there's this almost like the monkey on the back, right? Of, with our business, we have a great new idea, and after 2 weeks, we're on to the next thing. We have this idea about, right, we're going to do this as a KPI. We're going to focus on leads. Great. We've got loads of leads. What we're going to do now? Oh, well, we've got jobs. We're going to work them. We're not going to worry about generating leads in our candidate qualifications. That for me is like, well, if we're going to do something and it's actually, you can actually explain this to your staff that this is going to help them, and it goes back to their intrinsic motivators. Why aren't we continuing to do that? Why aren't we driving those levels of standards? And I think what you said about the values piece, that comes before the standards from my perspective. But you're right that, and I worked at a business that specifically didn't set a line of values, which I got a lot of experience working at that company, so I can't regret anything. But after I heard that and they said values are bullshit, that's when I started to go, okay, what are we all aligned on then? Where is this going if we don't have those values? And when they said to me, our values are just, we're professional, we're honest, it's all bullshit, Charles. It's just all bullshit. So I know you were saying that the authentic values is cliche. How do we make that not so cliche? So if there's a business owner that's doing a value proposition exercise, they're trying to change their values, or someone that's going to start a business that wants to think about what their values are, how do they go around doing that without making it seem cliche and BS?
The reality is that leadership team you're describing, the business did have values.
Probably.
They did have values.
We didn't know about them, though.
they had values because the values were the leadership function.
Yeah.
And they were the behaviors that the leadership function consistently demonstrated that were important. So how the leadership team behaves are the values of the business. So although they didn't want to articulate what their values were, there were things that were important to them from a behavioral perspective, which they represented as the leadership function, which were the values of those business. And whether they're articulated and written up on a wall or not, or whether you observe the leadership team and say, this is how we behave here. And that can be anything. Are they informal? Are they, do they behave informally or formally? It sounds like they behave quite informally. So actually one of their values might have been the fact that they're not, professionals, bullshit, blah, blah, blah. Well, actually that just means it's an informal organization where maybe it's informal communication, et cetera, et cetera. So there are values in every business. It's just whether you decide to bring them to life and articulate them. I think the second point that's really important is that I think as a leader, one of the most important things you can do is figure out what's the important stuff and then over communicate it really, really routinely.
Yeah.
Because what you effectively want to do is build a culture which is geared around your vision, your mission, your vision, and your values. And I think that was something historically that we were quite good at. We had a very clear mission. We were pretty good at turning that into a vision. And we had a very clear way of doing things. And the truth is, we probably didn't formalize our values. Looking back, I don't know if we even did that good a job of formalizing our values until we were about 30 or 40 heads. But we did have values. And I led that sales floor. So the sales floor, it was my values. What was important to me and what I did and how I behaved. And that just seeped through to the rest of the business. So what am I saying? I think everyone has values. The key is, can you articulate them? And then can you over communicate them on such a regular basis that people know this is who we are? And then really, really importantly, are there consequences to not behaving in line with the company values? Because if there aren't any consequences to not behaving in that way, that it means the values BS.
Yeah, of course. And I think that kind of moves on into, the standards. But before I get to that point there, a question for you. When you were leading that sales team and scaling that business, what were your set of values personally? And what were the set of values that you drove in the business? Just out of curiosity.
Well, it was all the same stuff. They were the same things. So my business partner, John, and I were super aligned. We were really complementary, but we were also super aligned. So we had complementary skill sets, but I think we were both from a vision and a values perspective, really aligned. We worked incredibly hard. And the other thing I think that's interesting about culture and values is that there's this model that your values stay the same forever. I don't actually agree with that.
Yeah, I was going to say probably not.
Yeah, so I think businesses evolve and they mature, both commercially and culturally. And I think early on, we worked incredibly hard. We partied hard. We will work hard, play hard. There's no doubt about that. We were ruthlessly focused on becoming the number one player in our space. We had exceptionally high standards of performance in the business, and we didn't tolerate underperformance isn't the way to describe it. We didn't tolerate people who didn't have the same motivation and drives to be successful.
Yeah.
So, without going into it any more detail, I think we were quite a unique beast back then. As time went on, though, I think that culture went too far.
Really?
And we had people not turning up on time on a Friday. We'd go out on a Thursday night, and people weren't getting to their desks on time the following day. And I wasn't setting a good example because I was as bad, if not worse, than everyone. There was a big drinking culture and all that sort of stuff. So, I think it got to the point where we looked at it and we said, you know what, this isn't the right culture for this business if we're going to continue scaling to the next stage of growth. Yeah. So to change the culture, you have to change the values. So we definitely had to professionalize a little bit. I think also our values as an organization, we were too sales orientated with regards to sales versus customer service.
Okay.
And we looked at that as well and said, you know what, our retention rates, our attrition rates are too high. We need to change our business practices as a business. And the starting point around that, I think, is the culture of the sales floor and how we operate. So again, a long-winded answer to your question, but I think we went through a couple of big sort of inflection point changes with regards to our culture. But bottom line, the leader or the leaders of a particular organization and or business unit are the ones that reflect the values back to the employees.
Yeah, no, I like that. And that really does go into the standards, because I've worked in both those types of environments. I was explaining this to the trainees yesterday, that my first job when we did contract nursing recruitment, this is how toxic it was back in like 2014, 2015. The manager on the sales floor would take a £50 note out, put it on the table, said odds on who's going to be the first one to leave across the office. Because it was like the culture of like, you can't be the first one to leave the office. Even if you worked in operations, finance, compliance, who don't earn commission, gets to 5 o'clock, they can do what they want. There's no incentive for them to want to stay late. So then obviously as a trainee or as a youngster, you're going to go, oh, I reckon Alex in compliance will probably leave. I reckon Joe Bloggs on finance will probably leave. And then we would place bets of who's going to leave first. And then you felt like you couldn't leave at 6 o'clock, even though you've been in the office an hour early, stayed an hour late, because no one else has left on your desk. So then you're like, fuck. But then once you started to earn the commission, because I started as an apprentice, we didn't earn any commission for the first 9 months. We were on an awful salary. When I started to earn commission, and I realized, oh, if I stay late and then I call nurses when they finish their shift and they hate their job and I can double their money, they're going to want to speak to me. And then you start earning the commission. You're like, oh, I'm going to definitely stay late. But the standards back then were more about staying, like values as well, like more about staying late, working hard. I remember to this day, like it's 10 years, it's stuck in my head. My manager always used to say, you've got to fucking want it. If you don't, fuck off, get out. Not of our business, just get out the industry. It's too taxing if you don't want it. You need to fucking want it every single day. So it was like a almost, the standard was just work harder than everyone, do double the amount, because it was a lot of volume, right? Do double the amount of calls, get in front of people before every single person. And in fairness, and again, it was quite toxic the way they would handle it. But if you were a nurse and I didn't call you at 8:35 and you put your CV on nurses.co.uk at 8:30, and I call the candidate and I go, oh, they're already with another agency, you'd get absolutely bollocked in front of everyone in the office. The manager would literally point at you and scream. And again, can't really do this these days. I learned the hard way. Just the embarrassment in front of the entire office of like 90 people. The fuck is wrong with you? I told you, fucking call that candidate. Are you fucking thick? And you're like, oh my God. But it's really, really bad. It was like scarring. I remember going home.
Sounds
like,
fun.
I guess they manipulated me into thinking that was normal. Do you know what I mean? When I told my friends that's what's happened, they were like, you can't do that. You got to speak to HR. Like, we don't have HR. I don't know if many recruiters.
He is HR.
Yeah, literally. But the standards were held that when I started to mentor people coming in every single day, what nurses have you got out tonight? Have you texted them all? Oh, they're fine. Trust me, Charles, they're fine. Fucking text them all right now. Text them all, because if they don't turn up, I'm going to get bollocked by the manager. So there was a standard there of like, if someone goes onto that job board, you get in front of them before before any other recruitment agency. Like there was just these level of standards that were just so high, and if you buckled from them, you would just get absolutely fucking caught out in front of the whole office. And I'm not saying, by the way, that nowadays I don't think that will go down very well these days at all, right? I'm not saying that's right, but I have worked in businesses as an external coach, and I've seen standards drop, and I've seen someone say, "Oh, Alex took a counter offer," and I'm like, why? Like, did you not qualify that? So I don't think I did. Let's see the notes in the system. I haven't added the notes to the system. And I'm like looking at management going like, guys, like there's just simple things like having the fucking notes in the system to refer to on every call, having that conversation in the first, why isn't this happening? And then you start looking at the 1-ups or the Cube 19s and seeing how many people have lost out to counter offers. And it's a simple fact is that there's no one actually holding them to the fucking standards. And then they look at themselves in the mirror and go, I have no idea why. It's just like, oh, come on, man. So I guess from your perspective, like with those wild, weird anecdotes from over 10 years ago, how, like, as a business owner, what did you do to maintain those levels of standards? Because you talked a lot about the attrition, retention rates and stuff, and maybe pushing people too hard. But what was that sweet spot of holding the standards? What did that look like?
Hiring really motivated people, creating a great environment, and where people had fun. Like ours was a high performance environment, but it was also a lot of fun. You know, the 4 things I talk about, you got to keep people learning, earning, growing, and having fun. If you get those 4 things right, typically you're going to be okay. And then I think I was quite a tough leader. I had very high expectations, but I did care about my people. Yeah. So I think managing duality is really important. You've got to hold 2 contrasting like viewpoints or actions at the same time. So I think highly supportive and highly demanding at the same time gives you the ability to be able to drive those high standards. And they were the standards I expected of myself. I worked the hours. I wasn't saying everyone you've got to work long hours and then, by the way, I leave on time.
Yeah.
So I think if you set the right tone, look, obviously your previous, that leader clearly that does sound toxic, and they've gone far too far. And then you've got to get the balance right with those things. People still have a life outside of work, right? Yeah. But at the same time, I don't think it is acceptable that if someone's behind target, they get up and leave consistently.
Yes.
Like, don't get me wrong, if you go and have dinner with your partner and it's been booked in advance, of course, things that you've got football tonight, I get it. But if you look at that week, if someone is tracking behind target, it's a sales job. Mm-hmm. Your target is your target that you effectively set yourself at the beginning of the month or the quarter. Hit your target. That's your responsibility. You are responsible to the business to hit that number or do everything within your power to do it. So again, I think it's about, over communicating the important stuff. This is who we are. We hit number.
Yeah. Something you just said there is interesting, because when I work with newer consultants to the industry, I always explain to them that on my very first day of my apprenticeship, the director came downstairs and said, this is not a 9-to-5 job. It's as simple as that. Your contracted hours are 9 to 5 or whatever it was, but you will not be doing 9 till 5. You will be doing more hours, and we're not going to tell you to do those hours. I'm saying that if you are not hitting your target once you finish your probation, etc., it is, like you said, it is your job to hit your target.
Exactly what I used to do.
Yeah. And I remember on my second week, it's so much to take in on your first couple of weeks. It's just, you got just so much information. You're learning about your market. Especially for me, I didn't do an office job before. So it's the first time I've been in an office environment doing those long hours.
Getting screamed at.
Yeah, well, not that job. I wasn't getting screamed at in that job. The next job I was. This was more like, I won't go into it. But the first job that I had, I was only there for a few months, but it was more like, as soon as you go out, everyone talks about you behind your back type thing.
That sounds nice too.
I'd rather you scream my face, to be honest, rather than me find out from somewhere else. But anyway, it is what it is. But I just remember on my second week, and I used to suffer really badly from migraines. I don't really get them that much anymore. But I remember, God, it sounds like I'm just telling like all toxic war stories, but this one sticks with me. They were doing a late shift, so everyone was going to stay late, and they were going to go through the job boards the last 3 months. They were going to call these candidates, etc., etc. I had a migraine that day, and before I used to get what's called an ocular migraine, if you've ever had them, and for people that don't know what that means, your vision starts to go, and I could only see the peripheral, right? So I'm sat there, and my screen's just white. I can't see my screen. If I look like that to the side, I can see the little bit of the screen. So I looked over my desk, because opposite my director, and said, I've got a really bad migraine. And she went, oh, can you stand up for me? And I went, yeah. And she went, turn around, just walk just a couple of steps and back and sit back down. Okay, you're fine. And then she carried on typing, and everyone was just giggling. I went, no, you don't understand. I need to go and get some ibuprofen or something. I've got a really bad migraine. And I was like, my vision, I was like, just fucking get on with it. Just do your job. You're fine. So I started Googling, like, how the fuck do you get rid of a migraine without ibuprofen? Like, what do I do here? And as soon as it got to like 5:30, whatever, everyone's like staying late. And I just got up and I was like, guys, I'm feeling really rough. I'm going to go home, get a good night's sleep, and I'm going to come back tomorrow. And if we can do a late shift, I'll come back. We'll do that tomorrow. And they went, oh, we're doing the late shift today. I was like, okay, well, I'm not feeling great today, so I'm going to go home and get some rest, and I'm going to do it tomorrow. And they just looked at me and went, okay, mate, cool. You go home if that's what you think is right. I was like, okay, cool. And again, naive, like 20-year-old kid. I'm like, okay, great. That's what feels right to me, because I don't feel in the state in which I can perform. So I go home, come back the next day, get the email, go and speak to the director downstairs, i.e. you're going to get fired. And it's like, basically just got bollocked for not staying late, making up all these excuses, pretending to have a migraine, or the rest of it. The reason why I'm telling that story is because a lot of trainees, a lot of people new to the industry that say to me, oh, my manager's making me stay late, etc. And for some managers out there that force their people to stay late, I had a guy called Will on my podcast that put this perfectly. If someone's not in a state of performance for one day in that week, tell them to go home, tell them to rest, tell them to eat, tell them to go to the gym, and make sure they're tip-top magoo the next day. If that is happening consistently for more than one day a week, there is a fucking problem, and you should be ahead of the curve. You can't make people stay late every day, like you said, if that's not their values, if they want to go to dinners, play football, do whatever it is. But if you're not hitting target, and then you're going, oh, I've got football on Monday, see my missus on Tuesday, going to go and do this on Wednesday. No, maybe this isn't the right job for you. And that goes on to what we were going to talk about the firing quickly element. But that again, that's a lot there. But does that kind of make sense to you?
I think you nailed it at the beginning when you were talking about the fact is you set expectations and you form a social contract in the hiring process. This is who we are as a business. This is not necessarily the easiest place to work. There are easier options out there for you. We have a high performance culture. What does that mean? Let me talk you through what our culture is. We work long hours. We hit target. If we're behind target, we do something about it. This is not a 9 to 5 job. You go through all of that stuff and you tell the person to go away and think about whether this is really right for them and whether they're prepared to make that commitment. On the other side, you're obviously selling the benefits. This is the benefit you'll get from being in an organization like this. But you tell people to go away and think about this. This is not the easy option. There are easier options out there. If you're looking for the easiest way to make some money, this probably isn't the job for you. If you want to make as much money as possible and achieve X, Y, and Z, this is a great place. But I think the key is that you have that agreement in place and you're really, really articulate with regards to what that looks like. And then you have every right, once they've started, to be able to pull them up on it if they're not living up to the things that were agreed, and vice versa. You've agreed things to them with regards to how you're going to support them, etc., etc. So get that stuff right at the beginning of the process, and then you can have those awkward conversations really quickly if necessary.
Do you think this day and age companies can really succeed? I guess it very much depends on what their goals are as a business. Do you think a lot of companies these days in recruitment can succeed with a culture that isn't as what it was back in the day, where it was like we work long hours, etc.? So I've worked with some businesses where as soon as it hits 5-6 o'clock, people are just straight way out the door. No one even.
I think it's weird. I think
it's weird. You don't think that's just not
recruitment? I think look, rather than just without data, you're just another person with an opinion. I think look at the Challenger sale. What a great book. And I think the Challenger sale is great because it identifies that in complex sales, enterprise level sales, the Challenger is the most effective selling type.
Yeah.
Because they've done the studies on it. They've done the research on it. Outside of extremely complex sales, where you're not navigating a 10 billion revenue in maybe 100 or 100 billion revenue company trying to sell them tech. Outside of that, what do you think the most successful type of seller is consistently across all industries? Hard worker. That's it. So hard work works, and there's the study, very credible studies to support that. So can you be successful in recruitment without working extremely hard? Of course you can. But I tell you what, if you work extremely hard, the likelihood and the probability increases so dramatically that you will have considerable success. And I always say the same thing. When I first got into recruitment, I used to work, I think, 9 till 7. And that felt horrible. I was like, oh my God, this is hard work. I tell you what, when I started earning proper money, I didn't mind.
Yeah.
And you kind of said something similar on that earlier. When I started earning 6 figures as a 21, 22-year-old, I thought I was Jeff Bezos. Life was good, and all of a sudden, I'm quite an extreme individual. I was working till 10, 11 o'clock at night if I needed to, because I was making so much money and I was enjoying it, therefore. So all of a sudden, hard work didn't seem so hard work to me anymore. So I think you just have to go through that process where you join the right environment, and it's probably going to suck for a little bit. But I tell you what, you're not in the mines, you're not in the trenches being shot at. You don't have a stressful job. Like, have some perspective. You talked earlier about the sort of money that young individuals without necessarily academic backgrounds, they're not, you earn more than a junior doctor.
Exactly.
So the potential, the meritocratic opportunity and the potential of the recruitment industry to come in and do really, really wonderful things for yourself is so huge. I think you've got to try and retain that perspective and not lose sight of, diddums. You're working slightly longer than a 9 to 5, yet you're earning a 6-figure income at 21, 22 years of age. I think there is a bit of perspective there.
Yeah.
The old man in me coming out, Charles. This is the old hardcore man.
No, I like it because it's interesting, right? Because, I'm a younger millennial, right? And a lot of business owners that I'm speaking to at the minute are in their 30s and 40s. And in the next 10 years or so, we're going to start to see a lot more Gen Z business owners. And again, this is a very stereotypical thing. And I don't like when people say, all Gen Z is this. Because when I first had a LinkedIn account, it was millennial bashing. It was like, you bloody avocado eating bullshit, like lazy workers, etc. But a lot of it is I'm being forced to work hard. I want a work-life balance. Like, I don't know. My wife was telling me that they ran a study about what was actually important to a lot of the younger generation. And it wasn't the money aspect because, and again, this is broadly speaking, by the way, so forgive me, but a lot of them have this perspective, which again, I'm in recruitment, it's like, get that out of your head. But largely in society, a lot of these Gen Zers believe they won't be able to ever buy a house. What's the point in owning a car? Global warming, all the rest of it. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is that, there are a lot of people in this industry that are not as intrinsically motivated by money. And if I can just barely scrape by hitting my target and I get to leave at 5 o'clock, then that's fine. Which is, by the way, what I did in my last year and a half of recruitment, because I had my old manager's voice in the back of my head saying, if you don't want it, get out. I didn't want to do the sales aspect of recruitment solely. I wanted to lead, I wanted to coach, I wanted to train, except I wanted to use more of my NLP and stuff. So, and again, at that point, I was training Thai boxing 2-3 times a week. So that was more important. So as long as I just about hit my sales target and I was on, the top 3 to 5 in the sales leaderboard, as soon as it hit 5:30, Alex, I was like, right, see you later, guys. And the managing director's like, mate, like, you're on 200 grand this year. You could smash that. You could, and I'm like, I'm all right. I've got my house. I'm going to get married soon. Got a car. Like, for me, my most important thing is getting fucking good at Thai boxing, kicking people in the head. He's like, oh, but people look up to you. They want to, and I was like, I just don't, I've been there, I've done that. I don't want to do those hours. I'm not enjoying it. And that goes to what you said. You enjoyed it. If you're not enjoying those long hours, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to be sat there calling people, getting told to fuck off by clients, calling candidates after work, I'm eating my dinner, etc.? Yeah, sure, if you're earning the money, but if that's not your key motivator, which apparently, and again, I'll have to find the study somewhere, if that's not the key motivator for a lot of people, could be quite hard for people to drive that, right?
Well, look, I think first and foremost, your drive has changed. I think you're still a great example of someone who can come into the business, get to that sort of standard from an earning and performance perspective, and then you've kind of earned the right to do what you want almost to a degree. Look, I think if you look at that stuff and say that there is a trend towards the younger generation preferring work-life balance to career, I think that sounds completely reasonable. I think what we can't do, though, is be too binary with it, because a lot of young people, I say young, a lot of young people I meet are incredibly motivated and want to achieve, super things in their career and from a financial perspective. So maybe you could argue that it's getting harder to find those people, but I know for a fact they're still there because I meet them all the time. So the reality is, I think also generationally, we all say that about the generation that comes after us. Every single generation that comes after us isn't as hardworking, and so I think there is a constant theme there. And there might be a trend around that. I think with increased cost of living, things might start to change a little bit, because, I don't think, I think there's some challenges around like our productivity as a country and what that's meaning from a cost of living perspective. So I think money might start to become a little bit more important for some people, but I think generally it's still just a case of doing the same thing, which is maintaining standards in the hiring process and ensuring you're in hiring you've got to choose your tribe. Choose your tribe. And if your environment is high performance and that means X, Y, and Z, just make sure you're hiring people that fit that criteria and aspire to those same values as you.
100%. Well, Alex, I'm conscious of time. I could speak to you all day, mate. I've really, really enjoyed this. And yeah, I honestly, I'd like to do this again. If we could do face-to-face as well down the line, that'd be epic. As you know, the last question I always finish every episode with is, following today's episode, how can people get 1% better in recruitment?
Yeah, gamify it. That's what I used to do. So I just figured out what the metrics and my numbers were. And then every single day, I understood what I was trying to get better at from a numbers perspective. And then I measured that consistently. Now, admittedly, obviously, on a day-to-day basis, you're not necessarily going to get a true reflection of where you're at. But if you start measuring stuff on a monthly or quarterly basis, you start to get a really good understanding of your base rate and also what you're getting better at. So have a growth mindset. Don't fall into the trap of just going through the motions. Mindfulness, although I'm not into meditation, mindfulness of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis from a work perspective, and treating each call or whatever it might be with fresh eyes and a learner's mindset, and then actually measuring whether you're getting better or not, because that's the thing also that I think is really motivating when you do see that improvement curve. Unreal.
Mate, awesome. Really, really enjoyed this. So much value. I can't wait to transcribe all of this and take away all my key takeaways. So, yeah, it's been awesome, man. In terms of how people can reach out to you and what types of people to reach out to you, just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I do advisory. I'm always looking at investment opportunities. So if there's individuals out there, typically at the moment, I'm looking at investments within existing recruitment businesses where founders have got the business to a certain size or scale or level of profitability, but are looking to get to that next stage of growth and would see the value in a capital investment, but also, strategic support and advice from a partner.
Wonderful. And
I'm on LinkedIn.
I was going to say, yeah, LinkedIn. I'll put that in the description of this. So yeah, awesome. Anyone that's made it this far, thank you again so much. And until next week.